Welcome to the deep dive, where we slice through a stack of information and pull out those essential nuggets of knowledge for you. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive into the complex world of addiction. We're focusing specifically on Alcoholics Anonymous. We've pored over historical accounts, foundational texts like the Big Book, and countless personal stories to understand how this unique fellowship emerged and, crucially, how it's helped millions find a way out of active addiction.
It's an extraordinary journey, isn't it? It really highlights resilience and, the power of connection and just profound personal transformation, especially when tackling something that feels, well, insurmountable like addiction. Our mission today is to kind of uncover the core insights. How does AA work? What are its fundamental principles?
Mm.
And maybe the big question, why does its approach resonate so deeply? For alcoholism, yes, but maybe even beyond. We're looking for the why behind its success.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey, starting right at the beginning. I mean, this movement is global now, touches so many lives. How did something like that actually, come to be?
It really all began with just two individuals. We know them mostly as Bill W. and Dr. Bob S. And you have to picture the time, right? Early 20th century. Severe alcoholism. It was mostly seen as like a moral failing, maybe lack of willpower, very few effective solutions. Bill W., he was this high-flying broker, but his drinking just devastated him. Spiraled into what the sources actually call alcoholic insanity. He hit this point of absolute crushing desperation, a rock bottom so profound it actually sparked a powerful spiritual experience while he was in the hospital. It wasn't just clarity. It fundamentally shifted things for him.
Wow. Okay, and Dr. Bob, what was his story running parallel to that?
All right, so Dr. Bob, he was a respected Akron physician, but his own drinking, completely unmanageable. He had those severe morning jitters, missed classes in college, later struggled with work. Interestingly, he didn't initially report blackouts or compulsion in the way Bill W. did, but his drinking was definitely progressing. He eventually sought help from the Oxford Group. That was an evangelical Christian movement focused on transformation through honesty, confession, service, principles you definitely see echoed in AA later. The pivotal moment for him, and really for AA itself, was June 10th, 1935. That's the day Dr. Bob had his last drink. And he stayed sober for the next 15 years, right up until he passed away.
So it sounds like this individual desperation combined with this budding spiritual approach that was the fertile ground. But it wasn't just them, right? Who else was critical in shaping this thing early on? Any unsung heroes?
Oh, absolutely. You're right.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Bill and Bob. Key non-alcoholic figures were, well, crucial. You've got Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism. AA members often call him a medical saint
A medical saint. Why?
because he really impressed on Bill W. that alcoholism was an illness, a disease, with symptoms, a progression, not just a moral failing. That medical perspective was like revolutionary at the time. Then there was Henrietta Seiberling. She was active in the Oxford Group, and she's the one who actually connected Bill and Dr. Bob in Akron, made that first life-changing meeting happen. And Dr. Samuel Shoemaker, a clergyman. Bill W. talked about his utter honesty and terrible sincerity, said he provided the spiritual keys that helped liberate them, and others too, like T. Henry and Clarice Williams, they hosted some of those very first meetings. It was a real collective effort.
Yeah, it's clear it was this powerful synergy. You had the medical understanding starting to emerge, the raw personal experience of addiction, and these deep spiritual principles all kind of coming together.
Exactly. And from those interactions, really born out of just a desperate need for a solution, the core framework of Alcoholics Anonymous started to form. At its heart, you have the 12 steps. That's the path for individual recovery. And then the 12 traditions, which guide the fellowship, keep it unified and functioning.
Okay, the steps and traditions. Now, for a lot of people, that phrase hitting bottom is almost synonymous with AA. Is that really like a requirement? Do you have to hit rock bottom? Or is it maybe more nuanced?
That's a really good question, and the sources are pretty clear. Few people will sincerely try to practice the AA program unless they have hit bottom. Quote, now that's not about gatekeeping, it's more a recognition of, well, human psychology when you're in the grip of addiction. The program asks for attitudes and actions that, let's be honest, almost no alcoholic who is still drinking can dream of taking. The real insight there, I think, is the paradox. Powerlessness leads to strength, that deep willingness to change. It often only comes when the pain of staying the same is worse than the fear of changing. It's about getting to that point where the desire to avoid hitting bottom again was more powerful than the desire to drink, Without that desperation, that willingness just isn't quite there.
So, okay, it starts with acknowledging that fundamental powerlessness over alcohol or maybe whatever the addiction is. That's step one. What happens then?
Exactly. That's the crucial first step. Admitting we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. It's not about weakness, it's about radical honesty. Just facing reality. Then comes the second step. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This idea of a higher power is absolutely key, but it's deliberately framed as God as we understood him, meaning it's not tied to one specific religion.
Right. That seems important.
Hugely important.
Yeah.
Lots of people, especially coming in, they resist the God idea, maybe bad past experiences or just philosophical beliefs. But AA just encourages an open mind and willingness. You get to define it yourself. For some, the group itself, the fellowship, becomes that higher power initially. It's just about acknowledging something bigger than your own willpower, which clearly hasn't worked.
And that willingness you mentioned, what does that unlock? How is it the key?
Willingness really is the key. It opens the door. And it leads directly to humility. Humility is seen as the foundation principle of each of AA's 12 steps. The insight here is profound. Without humility, without setting aside the ego and the self-reliance that have failed you again and again, lasting sobriety and, frankly, happiness are just elusive. From that foundation, the program guides you through a searching and fearless moral inventory. Looking at yourself honestly, admitting wrongs to yourself, to your higher power, and importantly to another human being, and then making amends where you can. That deep self-reflection, that outreach, it's veil for shedding the baggage of active addiction, finding some inner peace.
Okay, so that's the individual journey through the steps, but you also mentioned the traditions guiding the fellowship itself. What's one of the most maybe striking or vital ones for AA's survival?
Definitely the principle of anonymity. It's foundational and honestly quite ingenious. The 11th tradition says, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. And the 12th tradition builds on that. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Principles before personalities.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing is, this came partly from early fears. Fear of public distrust towards alcoholics,
Yeah.
and also the fear that individual ambition or maybe a public slip-up by a well-known member could damage the whole movement or protects the program. Early members were also very careful about sharing personal stories outside the group to maintain trust. It hammers home that it's the message of recovery that matters, not the messenger.
So it keeps the focus on the consistent message and the principles, not on any one person. That makes a lot of sense for stability long term.
Precisely. And closely tied to that is self-support. Another example of AA's foresight, really. Early on, the philanthropist John D. Rockefeller Jr. offered a pretty substantial sum, $5,000. But he also wisely stressed that this fellowship should soon become self-supporting. There was this deep fear that money would spoil this thing. So AA declared for corporate poverty.
Corporate poverty.
Yeah, basically meaning they strictly decline outside contributions. This prevents any external influence, financial or political. It keeps them focused only on their primary purpose, helping alcoholics recover. That radical independence is key.
It's amazing to see how these core principles took hold and then fueled such incredible growth. I mean, how quickly did AA actually spread beyond those first few people, especially with that kind of hands-off financial approach?
The growth was genuinely exponential, almost viral, you could say. By 1957, you've got over 200,000 members. 7,000 groups in 70 countries. Fast forward just 2 decades, 1978, almost 28,000 groups. And the big book, that main text, Alcoholics Anonymous, sold over 2 million copies by then. By 2001, the estimate was over 2 million members worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a massive scale for an organization that's non-professional, entirely volunteer-driven, and deals with something so personal and often stigmatized, like addiction.
Truly remarkable, a grassroots movement like that. What were some of the things that helped fuel that kind of widespread awareness?
Well, publicity definitely played a role, often it seems, with AA's careful cooperation. You had things like a 1958 TV production and the 1963 movie Days of Wine and Roses. Those brought the issue and the possibility of recovery into the public eye. But maybe the biggest catalyst was an article by Jack Alexander in the Saturday Evening Post back in 1941. That piece literally deluged AA with inquiries from struggling alcoholics. Membership basically doubled in a year after that. Even news stories about that Rockefeller dinner we mentioned boosted awareness and membership significantly.
It really sounds like there was this huge unmet need out there, people desperately looking for solutions to addiction, and AA somehow managed to reach them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And A didn't just stay in church basements or community rooms. It started reaching into institutions, places where people were often at their absolute lowest, totally isolated by their addiction. Early reports mention groups in hundreds of hospitals and prisons. And there's this one striking statistic. Something like 80% of these parolees involved with AA in prison have found permanent freedom after release, compared to only about 20% before AA was available there.
80% versus 20, that's significant.
It really speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the program's effectiveness, even in the toughest environments, offering a real path for people often considered, well, beyond help.
The numbers are impressive, absolutely. But like you said, it's the personal stories that really bring it to life. When you look at those accounts, what do people actually say about their experience? What's that emotional journey like when you're grappling with addiction and find AA?
The stories, they paint such a vivid picture, usually a shift from just utter despair to eventually profound peace. One member described being beaten into willingness to believe anything I heard and finding freedom ever since. Think about that phrase, beaten into willingness. It just captures that utter exhaustion and surrender that often precedes recovery. Another story, this educated agnostic who initially just laughed at any mention of God, but eventually found belief, found sobriety. People often arrived in terrible shape, physically and mentally, some with like a persecution complex, couldn't remember things said minutes ago, maybe even hearing voices, seeing things, just broken.
So it's not always some sudden lightning bolt conversion, even for people deep in severe addiction.
Not always, no. And that's really important. Some did have what they called sensational spiritual experiences, sure. But for many, it was gradual. The sources say everyone gradually finds his or her own pace in moving through the steps. That feeling of intense isolation, that self-imposed prison of addiction, that's a constant theme before AA. But it gets replaced by connection, by belonging. As one person put it so well, AA put a we in my life, replacing that intense self-centeredness with, real fellowship, a shared journey. That shift from me to we seems incredibly powerful.
That's a huge transformation. What are some of the key feelings or maybe realizations that seem to come up again and again in these stories of overcoming addiction?
Relief. That's probably the biggest one initially. Just profound relief from being alone, relief at finally being understood, truly seen by people who get it. One person remembered hearing someone in a meeting just say she was an alcoholic, and bam, I knew then I was in AA. And that simple recognition brought this whole cascade. Insecurity replaced by confidence, fear replaced by faith, resentment replaced by love, and despair replaced by joy.
Wow.
Yeah. And also the crucial, really liberating realization that alcoholism, addiction, it's an illness, a disease with identifiable symptoms. That brings such immense relief from all the self-blame, the judgment, the shame that just suffocates you in active addiction. It's like, okay, this thing that's wrong with me, it has a name. And maybe, just maybe, there's a solution.
It sounds like a complete shift in perspective, from self-hatred and chaos to some kind of understanding and clarity.
Totally. People describe a new state of consciousness and being, where the insanity and inner turmoil disappeared.
Yeah.
The focus shifts away from that extreme self-centeredness, demanding the world revolve around you, demanding happiness on your own terms. It shifts towards love and service, towards finding happiness and actually giving themselves to others. It's described, importantly, not as a cure, but as a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. It emphasizes that this is an ongoing journey, a daily practice, a profound mental and emotional turnaround.
Okay, so once someone achieves that initial sobriety, how does AA help them maintain it day-to-day life, Especially given how cunning addiction can be.
Right. It really boils down to developing new, sober habits or ways of acting and thinking. The core idea, you hear it constantly, is staying away from the first drink.
Yeah.
That's the whole game. Members really emphasize that one drink is too many, but 20 are not enough. There's no safe middle ground for an alcoholic.
Right.
So it's about constant vigilance, taking these unremitting inventories, looking honestly at selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear, and dealing with them immediately, often by talking it through with someone trusted, maybe making amends if needed. It's very proactive, moment by moment.
And if those negative feelings, those old urges, start creeping back in, how does the program offer immediate practical help?
That's where the fellowship itself is just absolutely crucial. It's the built-in support system. Things like telephone therapy get mentioned. Literally reach for the phone instead of a drink. Simple but effective. And the role of a sponsor, vital. A sponsor is a recovered alcoholic who guides you. It's described as a special friendship, someone you can be entirely honest with. Sponsors often have, as one source put it, more concern, hope, compassion, and confidence for us than we have for ourselves, especially early on. And just the simple act of going to meetings, hearing those actual case histories, sharing your own stuff, it breaks the isolation, makes those dangerous thoughts and urges much less likely to occur when we are with other people, especially other non-drinkers.
It sounds like a really practical system, but also deeply spiritual. It's like a
Yeah.
whole approach to living free from addiction's grip, a holistic change.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's a key takeaway. It's often described not just as a program to stop drinking, but a program for living.
Hmm.
Members learn to practice these principles in all areas of life, not just related to alcohol. It transforms, hopefully, difficulty with living into a joy of living. They find peace and serenity, partly by learning acceptance in all circumstances, and by internalizing that idea that maybe God is the doer, not me. Letting go of that need to control everything. It's about cultivating gratitude and, maybe most profoundly, finding meaning and staying sober by helping others who are still struggling.
What an incredible deep dive. Really unpacking the history, the principles, the huge impact of Alcoholics Anonymous. We've seen how this movement, starting from just intense personal suffering and this baffling illness of addiction, grew into a worldwide fellowship, offering this powerful path to, as they say, freedom from bondage.
It truly is a powerful testament, isn't it, to the idea that even these deeply, deeply ingrained patterns of addiction can be transformed through things like radical honesty, real humility, and connecting with some kind of power greater than yourself. That idea of recovery, unity, and service, those are the three legacies. They form this sort of three-legged stool supporting the whole way of life, where giving away freely what you've been given becomes the actual path to keeping your own sobriety and finding a life with purpose.
So, as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. If a program built on principles that can seem almost counterintuitive, like embracing powerlessness to find strength, finding community through vulnerability, discovering purpose and service, if that can help people overcome something as baffling and powerful as addiction, well, what other seemingly unmanageable challenges in your own life might benefit from maybe trying some of those same ideas? Radical honesty, humble self reflection, seeking help beyond yourself, and maybe committing to serving others. Just something to think about.